May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable to you, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. If you walk onto a high-voltage job site and see a veteran electrician standing in front of a live 480-volt control panel, you might notice something strange. There's no rushing, there's no panicking, and most importantly, the experienced electrician probably has one hand tucked firmly into their pocket. To an apprentice, that might look lazy. To an outsider, it might look casual. But in high voltage work, the one-hand rule is a sign of deep professionalism. Because this electrician knows something dangerous. If one hand touches a live wire and the other touches grounded metal, the current can travel across the chest, straight through the heart. So the hand stays in the pocket. Not because the electrician is terrified, not because the electrician is weak, but because this veteran electrician respects the power that they're handling. That's the kind of fear and trembling that Paul is talking about in Philippi. When we hear that phrase, work out your salvation with fear and trembling, we often imagine a nervous religious person constantly worried that God is angry. We picture spiritual anxiety, moral perfectionism, trying desperately not to screw it up. But that's not Paul's picture at all. Because immediately after saying that, Paul says, "For it is God who works in you." God is the power source. You are not the generator. You are the conductor. From this perspective, the meaning of Paul's words about fear and trembling takes on a different and deeper meaning. Working out your salvation is not about frantically manufacturing spiritual energy. It's about learning how to carry the current of God's love without resisting it, without distorting it, and without interrupting it. And here's the counterintuitive part. If God's power is love, and if love is flowing through you, then your heart becomes part of the circuitry. Which means that following Jesus' example of love means a hurting heart is not always a sign of failure. Sometimes it's simply an occupational hazard. When you love difficult people, your heart aches. When you care for someone who is sick, your heart aches. When you forgive someone who has wounded you, your heart aches. And when you pray for a broken world, your heart aches. That does not necessarily mean that something has gone wrong. It may mean the current is actually flowing. If you never feel anything, if compassion never costs you anything, if your heart stays perfectly insulated from the pain of others, then maybe the issue is not that you're too emotional. Maybe the issue is that you've become an insulator instead of a conductor. Now, Paul makes this even more challenging because the word you in this passage is plural and not singular. In Chatham, where I meaning Brad, grew up, you might hear yous, as in yous work out your salvation with fear and trembling. Paul is not speaking only to isolated individuals trying to privately improve themselves spiritually. He's speaking to a community. We often imagine salvation like a personal and private battery pack. We think in terms of my faith, my relationship with God, my spirituality. But Paul imagines the church more like a series circuit of Christmas lights. The power flows through the whole string, and that means that what happens in one part inevitably affects the others. If one bulb corrodes, if one wire breaks, if one connection loosens, the whole line flickers. This is why Paul keeps talking in Philippians about humility, unity, encouragement, shared love, and being of one mind. Because our spiritual health is communal. When bitterness grows in me, it affects you. When resentment grows in you, it affects me. When one person withdraws emotionally from the community, resistance increases in the whole circuit. And resistance matters because in an electrical system, resistance turns power into heat instead of light. And that is exactly what is happening in Philippi. Later in the letter, Paul names two church leaders, whose names I'm not going to try to pronounce right now. You can go look it up. Who are locked in conflict. We don't know what the argument was, but Paul treats it as a serious spiritual issue. Why? Because conflict in the church is not merely an interpersonal annoyance. It's a mission problem. When the community spends its energy on internal friction, the power meant to illuminate the community gets wasted, generating heat inside the walls. The church stops shining and starts smoldering. Paul is telling the young church at Philippi, clear the lines, stay connected, be humble enough to repair the circuitry and to repair the relationship. Not because unity is sentimental, but because love needs to be conducted through communities in order to be powerful love. A couple weeks ago, some volunteers gathered in the parlor room for AED training, the defibrillator training. We learned from the instructors that most people misunderstand what a defibrillator actually does. Movies have taught us that when someone flatlines, the doctor grabs the paddles, shouts, "Clear!" and restarts the dead heart with a dramatic shock. It's good stuff for TV. But medically, that's mostly fiction. A defibrillator cannot start a heart that has completely stopped. What it actually does is stop a heart that has become chaotic. In fibrillation, the heart isn't dead. The cells are firing wildly and independently. Every cell is trying to lead. The heart twitches uselessly, like a bag of worms. The problem is not the absence of energy. The problem is the absence of unity. So the AED sends a massive surge through the heart muscle to silence all the competing signals for one brief moment. It's a global reset. The hope is that after the silence, the heart's natural pacemaker will restart a healthy rhythm. And when the machine prepares to shock, it says something very important. And this is in all caps, by the way. Do not touch the patient. Why? Partly for your safety, but also because if you are touching the patient, you become an alternate path for the electrical current. You interfere with the rescue. You steal energy meant for the heart. I think there's a lesson here for understanding Paul's words about working out our salvation with fear and trembling. Sometimes spiritual maturity means learning when to stand clear, learning when our ego, our control, our outrage, our need to win, our need to always speak, and our need to always be right has become interference in the circuitry. Sometimes the holiest thing we can do is stop grabbing the wires, stop forcing, stop controlling, to stop trying to dominate the rhythm. And instead, to allow the grace of God to do the resetting work you cannot do yourself. Because you are not the source of life. God is. Remember, the veteran electrician keeps one hand in their pocket, not because they fear the light bulb, but because they deeply respect the unseen power that makes the light possible. And Paul says Christians should live in the same way. Respect the source, mind the connection, protect the heart, clear the resistance, and stay in the circuit. You are not the electricity. You're simply the wire. And if the circuit stays open and God's love can flow through us communally, then we may help keep a heart or two beating and hopeful. Amen?